Hey everybody, we have a short little lesson today on segments. Moving on from the first section, which was on all the basics and just how to name them, we're going to focus it on segments with geometry for the next week or so. And so at the top you can see we learned from our last lesson. What do we name this segment here? It goes from one endpoint P to another endpoint Q. And the answer is we learned it was labeled as PQ and specifically a bar on top, no arrows. Our first lesson, we saw rays in lines that have arrows and go on forever in one direction or both directions. But here with segments, they stop at two endpoints, therefore they have no arrows either on the picture or on the symbol. We did learn that the order of letters didn't matter. So segment QP is also correct. It doesn't matter which order you put the letters in. It does matter you put that bar symbol on top. Anyways, I have a ruler next to me here and on my iPad currently. I'm measuring it with a ruler, and I find out that it's 7 centimeters. The long way to write this would be the length of PQ with the bar is 7 centimeters. If you were writing a complete sentence, that's the only correct way to write it. But there's a shorter way to write it, and the short way to write it looks like this. PQ equals 7. Now there's something really important here that I don't know if you've caught yet. When I wrote PQ equals 7, I've written it perfectly correctly. And one of the things that I've done here is notice there is no bar written on that. It is just the PQ without a bar. When you are writing things with a bar, you're indicating it's a segment. When a bar and it has one arrow, you're indicating it's a ray. Bar and two arrows, you're indicating it's a line. And bar with no arrows indicates you're talking about how long a segment is and what number would be going with it. All right, doing the same thing here from the left. I measure it with my ruler here. And on my iPad screen at the moment, oh, look at that. It's also 7 centimeters. I don't need the centimeters there. I can put that in if I care about units, and there will be times in our class we will. But there's also a lot of times in class in geometry that we are interested in relationships and not exact measurements. So when we use numbers, we're not caring what specific units they'll be in. Sometimes we will, sometimes we won't. All right. Congruent segments mean segments with the same length. So of course, what we've just come up here, and I'm sorry I wrote that down wrong. I'll have to fix that. Give me a moment. Segments with the same length. So of course we just saw two segments, PQ and RT, both are the same length, 7 centimeters. They are congruent. The way you write that is PQ bar equals with a squiggle sign, that's our congruent symbol, QT. We're going to spend more time on the congruent symbol probably next week for all my classes. There's one of my periods. You might get to it this week, but I think it's going to be something we'll be talking about on Monday with that congruent symbol and what the symbol congruent means. We're just talking about briefly now. You mark the congruent segments by doing what's called tick marks. So tick marks are putting one little mark in the middle on both things, or maybe 2 marks, or maybe 3 marks. It doesn't matter how many marks you put. Typically, these are the marks you'll see. 1 tick mark on both, 2 tick marks on both, 3 tick marks on both. If they have the same tick marks, they're the same length. If they have different number of tick marks, they're different lengths. We don't always label things with numbers. Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. And anyway, you usually use these types of tick marks. There are other types of tick marks you see in some other resources. I've seen circles, I've seen triangles, I've seen smiley faces. But typically you see these sort of little slashes going through the segments the same way. So segments are congruent if they're labeled with the same number, the same tick marks, or the same measured length. And they're also, of course, congruent if that symbol there, let me highlight that symbol again, equals sign with a little squiggle. That squiggle is called a tilde. when that's on top, that also means they have to be congruent. That's pretty much it for congruent segments here for today. What you're going to be spending your time on is what's in this bottom left box, which is number lines. And just to be clear how big a number line is, how big is it from B to C? How big is it from A to B? A to B, most people get right. They count, but careful as you count here. How many spaces are you counting? 1 space, 2 spaces, 3 spaces. The answer for A, B is 3. Careful, it's not 2. I can understand you look in the middle of that red segment and you see 2 vertical bars. That's not how you measure. We're not measuring vertical bars. It's not 4 because you see there's a vertical bar at A and B. It's 3. You could also calculate this by subtraction. 0 minus -3. Double negatives become a positive. Subtract your 2 numbers. It doesn't matter if your segment is going over multiple spaces. Notice there's no bar here for 2 and no bar here for 4. But if they were there, you would do 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Count your spaces, and there would be 5 spaces. Or you could do this by subtraction. 5 minus 0. I do recommend the subtraction method. The subtraction method is something that will always work if you're careful and do it correctly. And then these are different numbers, so they are not congruent. If they were the same number, then you would say they are congruent. So with number lines, you can count little dashes, but as always you're counting the spaces between the dashes and not the dashes themselves. So again, look at that red segment A, B. Make sure you understand why it's 3 and not 2. Careful though, subtraction method is the best method, especially when it gets more complicated. You'll be going to IXL level B.4 in just a moment on that. And just to be clear, when you put numbers there, these numbers do represent length. The length of DE is 7 because the number 7 is there. The length of EAF is 27. There you go. And then the next new thing we're going to be doing in class is going to be, what do you know about the length of D to F on that bottom right picture? You might think the answer is obvious. You're right. But the minute we open up that can of worms, and I tell you, yes, you're right, it is 34, that opens up a whole other branch of connection with arithmetic, algebra, and geometry put together. And so that's something we'll get into next week. So you're going to be going to IXL. I believe it's level B.4 to a score of 90, but double check your Google Classroom to make sure that's right. Hope you have a wonderful day and a wonderful lesson. Finish your IXL, and you guys are done for the week. Take care.